I want you to go back to Psalm 127 this evening. Psalm chapter 127, again, we have been going through a series on bearing spiritual fruit. And in this series of bearing spiritual fruit, we started with the root system and talked about being rooted first in Christ, being rooted in, getting saved and having your salvation settled. We talked about being rooted in the Word of God. We talked about being rooted in God's love, about being rooted in God's wisdom. We talked about being rooted in a lot of those places concerning God's Word. Now we're talking about having a rooted family. And the first section in this, sermon in that section was the foundation of the family, saying that one, He is the designer of the family. He gets to tell us what the family is, and we ought to listen because, after all, He created it and defined it. And when we take that and adulterate it, we are taking something that was made to do one thing and are trying to make it do something else that it is not supposed to do, and it may appear to work for a short time, but ultimately that is not what is best. He is the designer. He is the builder, we said. He is also the protector, and He is the provider for the family. And some of those things we as men like to take upon ourselves and say, well, I'm the designer of my family, and I'm the builder, and I'm the one who makes the decisions for my family. And in one sense, yes, God has given the husband and father the responsibility in some of those areas, but it does not preclude God's responsibility of being the designer and the builder and the protector. We have as men that responsibility, and sometimes folks would say, well, it's just a men's world, right? And men are in charge, right? And women just have to submit. And notice that I use the word responsibility. Children want big things. I was asking the kids tonight. I said, what's something that you think mom and dad should do to help you become a godly man when you grow up? What's something that mommy and daddy should do now to help you become a godly man when you grow up? And the answers I got were, well, you need to give me a car and a cell phone. Another answer was, I need a suit, so that I can, and a phone so that I know how to get to church, so it can guide me to church. And I says, well, do you think that, having a car makes you makes you a man to begin with? Do you think that having church clothes makes you a godly person? Or even, do you think that going to church by itself makes you a godly person? We were having this discussion this evening on the way in, and, children need somebody to guide and lead them. They want the car, and they want the phone, and they want anything that we as parents are willing to give them, but they don't understand the term responsibility yet. To them, it's woohoo, something fun that I can do. But as you well know, driving around a 2-ton chunk of metal along the road is a big responsibility, because you're taking your life and many others in your hands at the same time, as well as having a phone or any kind of digital device. That is a responsibility. It is a weight upon you that you must learn to shoulder and to bear, or else it can destroy you. The same thing with a vehicle, the same thing with many other things. And as a man, the responsibility of leading a family may to some sound like, oh, it's a wonderful, great thing. Why do they get the glory of that? Oh, it's a responsibility. It is a heavy weight. It is a burden. There is a joy as well as that is a part of it. But we looked at first there, the foundation of the family, and then we looked at the fruit of the family, and we said that children are a possession of the Lord, and that children are a gift from the Lord. One is they belong to Him. Second is they are gifted and given to us just for that short period of time. And so we talked about how we ought to treat our children and view children rather than viewing them as nuisances or as nest egg drainers or 401k drainers or however else others might look at them, that they're going to cause me gray hairs or no hairs rather than looking at children in that way, looking at them as a gift from God, looking at them as special, which is, of course, diametrically opposed to the way the world most often views children. If you want your child, then fine, they're a great, wonderful thing to have. But if you don't want your child, then they're just a tumor that needs to be excised from your body. And this is unfortunately the way the world looks at children. We said that children are a gift from the Lord. Tonight I want to look at the future of the family. The future of the family. We're in Psalm 127. It's not a long chapter, so I want to reread the whole thing, remind us where we were. The theme of this passage, I should say, is what we find here at the beginning of Psalm 127. Verse number 1, it says, "Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." What parent doesn't look forward when they look into that little baby's face, or grandparent or aunt or uncle, as you sit there and you hold that baby and you look into their face and you try to look down time? What doors are going to open up to this child? What are they going to be like? Now, you're probably thinking about who they're going to marry and what career they might go into. Will they be a godly person, or will they, backslide away from God? You're probably not thinking, are they going to be a slow learner or a quick learner? Are they going to be extremely difficult to potty train, or are they just going to pick up on it real? You're probably not thinking about those things, although those things come to pass, right? Your children they're so different. My kids are so different from one another. Just the two oldest boys are completely different from one another in their likes and their behaviors, reactions, their personalities. And you look into that face and you wonder what the road ahead is going to be like for them. And what we often see in their face is potential. What will the road ahead hold for them? We sometimes wonder what our country is going to be like when our children become adults. How much will it have changed? How much more will outright sin be in our faces when our children become adults? When we think about the family itself, culture seems to predict the demise of the family as they try to redefine what family is. And now modern day kids' TV shows are including families with two moms or two dads, including families that have all kinds of strange things included so that they can broaden, our children's minds for us or in spite of us. But our world around us has predicted the demise of the family. Is there even a future for the biblical family? Well, there is, if the Christians will train their children in the way they ought to train them. It was said by I saw a song recently by a gay men's choir. I don't remember where they were from or anything, but the whole song was, "We're coming after your kids. We're coming after your kids." You know why? Because they can't have any. They can't have any of their own children to raise and to train up, and they're after their own likeness. So they have to go after somebody else's kid. If it was left up to them, this world would cease to exist after just a couple generations because they can't have kids. Think about this. They're not just going after the run-of-the-mill, unsaved family's kid who was growing up in a public school system, watching TV. They're not just going after those kids. Those kids are in hand for them. They're coming after the children of families who are in disagreement with them. And so they come in through TV shows, they come in through books, they come in through all sorts of things, and even children's music, to slowly condition their minds to believe that it's okay to have two moms, or it's okay to have two dads. That's just how some people are. It's okay for boys to wear dresses or for girls to dress like boys, because that's just how some people are, despite the fact that the Bible says, no, that is not how God created you to be. You may feel like you want to do some of those things, But just because it feels natural to you does not make it right to do. Just because you have a desire to do something does not make it right to do something. And I have to tell myself this all the time. I have to teach the children this all of the time. Because they may have a natural, innate desire to want to push their sibling down when their sibling was mean to them. That was natural. It came naturally. They felt like it needed to be done. It was a part of who they were. And so they needed to shove that child down because they felt disrespected or they felt angry. But does that make it right to do? Well, of course, no, it does not make it right to do. We understand this, that fire inside the stove produces light, it produces heat, it cooks food for us. It produces energy in the right kind of way, but that same energy outside the stove, outside the fire ring, is extremely destructive. Used inappropriately, it is extremely destructive. Is there a future for our family? Well, I like how there is this image here in the last two verses of Psalm 127, a image almost of warfare. Look at the last two verses. He says, as arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. We see in verse 4 this image of warfare and weaponry. In verse 5, we see the same image, still including warfare and weaponry, but also including government, where he says, happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. I'll talk more about that phrase, or those phrases here in just a little bit. So what is the future of the family? Number one, direction is needed. Direction is needed. I don't know how many of you have ever shot archery before, bows and arrows, whether it be long bows or compound bows or crossbows or something like that. But somebody gave me a compound bow, and I've tried it a few times, and I've decided that I need to do it with somebody that knows what they're doing so that I don't end up just destroying more arrows or my arm, or anything else. And I need a little direction in that area. So I've decided, I'm going to wait until I've got somebody to kind of show me what's going on and how to use this thing right. Because even if I do get it all the way back and I can consistently release the arrows, I'm still not 100% sure where it's going. I haven't figured exactly what these pins are for, what distances they're for, or how to adjust it or anything like that. So, I need some direction in that area. But you know what else needs direction? Those arrows. Those arrows are blunt objects. And in fact, if you were to even back up a little bit, today we buy these graphite, rods, and we screw on a arrowhead onto the end of it, and we make sure that it's been fletched just right so that it'll fly true and straight. But in ancient times, arrows weren't just purchased in the store. They had to be made. And so you'd go out and you'd find a reed or some other sort of twig that was relatively straight. And then you would attempt to straighten it as best as possible. You would notch it on one end and you would stick into there an arrowhead made out of stone or made out of some other similar material, even bone. You would carve that arrowhead and you'd shove it down in that notch, and then you'd lash it on there. Go to the other side and you'd stick some feathers down in the other side. So that those feathers would cause the arrow to fly straight. And then, after all that work, you might have an arrow that is going to go where you want it to go when you fire it. But that arrow just didn't show up. That arrowhead didn't just become sharp. That stick didn't just become straight. The end of it didn't just get notched, and feathers just didn't grow on one end of it. It took planning, forethought, skill. Children are compared to arrows here in these verses. An archer in Bible times would be very particular as he crafted his arrows, because his life would depend on it, wouldn't it? If he's out in battle, he needs an arrow that goes where he intends for it to go. If he's out hunting to feed his family, he needs that arrow to go exactly where he intends it to go. A successful arrow would be smooth, it would be fast, it would be balanced. And so he would carefully select the materials that he made his arrow from. Similarly, God instructs parents, grandparents, teachers, aunts and uncles. God instructs us with the similar raw materials. You've heard before that children are a blank slate. And in so many real senses, they are a blank slate. There's some things to be said about genetics. You can take two twins and split them up and raise them in two very different ways, rich, poor, athletic, intellectual places, and then they meet again one day, and I've seen many studies about this where they meet again one day and find out how very much alike they still are, how their interests are still the same, even though they grew up in wildly different ways. The genetics still had something to do with it. But those raw materials, that is the child that you hold there in your arms in their first minutes of life, there's no language there. There's nothing there. As far as I'm concerned, they're a shriveled potato, right? There's nothing going on there. Sometimes I wonder, are you thinking anything? Of course, the baby's just taking everything in. He's absorbing the whole world. But what does a parent do? He takes those raw materials. A parent has the responsibility to shape, to sharpen, and to balance the children, and to give them the direction they need to leave the home and launch out into adulthood. That ought to be the end goal of parenting, to launch them out. I joke with the kids, that they're going to be with me forever, that they're never going to stop giving me hugs and kisses, and they're never going to stop sitting in my lap, and they're always going to live, at home with me. But I also tell them this, that's not really what's going to happen, though. There's going to be a time where it's going to be a little awkward for you to come and sit in Dad's lap. Now I hope I never stop getting hugs and kisses, but there's going to be a time where you're not going to want to live at home with Mom and Dad anymore, and it's going to be time for you to launch out and to bear yourself up on your own 2 feet, to bear yourself up under your own wings, so to speak. And it's our responsibility to shape them now. If we wait till they're teenagers to start attacking their self-will, it's a little on the late side for that. That has to be attacked when they're a toddler, to be honest. My kids hit their terrible 2s when they were 1. They had terrible 1s. Now, Camden, he's still sweet. I don't think he's quite gotten to his terrible 2s yet. Do you think so? He's getting there. He's pretty good for Daddy. But some of the other kids, man, they hit their terrible 2s a little on the early side, for my liking, that is. And boy, I tell you what, you got to attack that self-will, not their self-worth, but you got to attack their self-will very early on to let them know who's boss. It's not them. And that training is going to change the course of the direction of the rest of their lives. And if you don't attack that self-will when they're little, they are going to be rebels for the rest of their life. A rebel, is somebody who stands against authority. Now, there may be some rebellions that are good rebellions, but for the most part, we don't want to be known as rebels, not as Christians anyways. But the Bible tells us that we are to shape them in those young years. We are to train them. Have you ever seen those little miniature trees that the Japanese like to make? As soon as the name comes to mind, I'm going to say it. You guys canceled each other out. I didn't hear what you said. Bonsai trees. Yeah, you ever seen how they do those bonsai trees? I went to a Japanese gardens down in West Palm Beach, and they had a whole section with nothing but bonsai trees. And most of them aren't actually real bonsai trees, but it's amazing how some of them, they'll just take a big flat rock, and then they'll plant it on that rock. And that's it. There's really no dirt or anything, but there's this tree attached to a rock. And of course, they have to water the rock every day. But you look at it, and it looks like it's a 200-year-old tree, but it's only this big. It's got like moss hanging from it, and it's got these gnarly limbs, and it's all intertwined. And you think, man, that tree looks really, really, really old. It looks like that tree ought to be 300 feet tall, but it's only this big. And what do you usually see wrapped around those branches? Copper wiring. Because they say, I want the branch to grow this way. And so they wrap copper wiring around that branch and bend it so that it grows that direction. They say, I don't like this branch over here. I don't want it there. And so they snip it off. They say, I want these 2 branches to wrap around each other. And so they take that copper wiring and they wrap those 2 branches around each other so that as they grow, they will continue to do so. Saw somebody talking recently about a willow fence. I was talking about that this morning. And they take willows and they plant them 6 or 8 inches apart. And then they bend them towards each other and they plant them in this crisscross pattern all the way down the fence line. And then they tie them together. And then as the years go by, not only do they grow thicker, but they grow taller. And then those trees, those willows begin to grow together and graft themselves together so that it's one solid fence line. And then the willow, the green part, grows out on top. I think that's kind of neat if you have that much patience on your fence line, that is, and want to do basket weaving all at the same time. But, what are you doing there? You're training those plants to do what you want them to do. Now, as children, we're not supposed to train our children to do what we want them to do. Some parents take that kind of mindset, though. Now, I guess that would depend on what you want them to do, but our children are our pets, so that we train them to be exactly whatever it is we want them to be. The best lawyer or the best doctor or the best theologian that, the college or university can put out. Well, we are supposed to train them, as it says in Proverbs 22:6, to train up a child in the way he should go, and way he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. I've heard a couple people talk about this verse from looking at it in different ways. But I think everybody can agree that this verse is certainly telling parents to train children up in a godly manner. Yes, in a godly manner. Well, that means we have to imitate it in front of them. We have to be an example of what a godly man or a godly woman ought to be. But it also means that we have to put structure into place to train them. Just like you take that copper wiring and you put it on the branches of that tree and you put a structure in place so that that tree will grow in the direction that you have designed for it to grow. There are many trees out there that need to be trimmed back during the winter. They need sometimes to be cut all the way back for the health and the longevity of the plant itself. Sometimes we think we're hurting it if we cut it back or if we trim it way back, when in essence, we're actually giving it a longer, more fruitful life. It can be the same thing with our children. We only have our children for a very short time, 17, 20 years. And by the time they leave our home, what they have is what we have taught them. And so we need to have a balanced direction for them so that they will successfully hit their target as these arrows. I like that mental picture of, pulling your child out of the quiver and then drawing back and launching them forth. Launching them out so that this power will go out there. And hopefully it's the power of God and not the power of lust or flesh or self or desire or career, but so that this power will launch out there and accomplish God's will over there and over there and over there. But crafting an arrow takes time. Providing direction for a child requires a great deal of time. They're not going to develop a proper walk with God overnight. They're not going to develop biblical foundations overnight or without any effort or time put into it. If your child is left to himself, what does the Bible say is going to happen? A child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame. And so then mom and dad have to be hands-on and involved during that time when they can still mold and shape and train on a day in and day out basis. I know sometimes it's, as parents, especially with little kids, you just desire to escape sometimes, to not have the responsibility, to not have somebody hanging off of you every second of the day, and to just kind of escape and to be a couple, for a little while. Or to be alone even for a little while. And moms know nothing of being alone, do they? Even when they go to the restroom, there's somebody at the door begging and needing mommy's presence immediately, right? Moms don't know anything about being alone. But crafting a child takes time. Understanding God's plan for their lives, we were talking about that on the way in tonight, about knowing what God's will for your life is. And one of the kids decided they already know what Bible college they're going to go to. And of course, it's the one Dad went to. And I said, well, you don't want to go to a Bible college just because it's where Dad went to, or just because it's where your homeschooling is, from. You need to let God direct you to where you need to go to college. You don't want to make a decision just based upon that. But besides, it's way too early to make a decision right like that. I said, well, do you know how you make a decision like that when you get older? So it starts today. You're living in God's will today, so that tomorrow morning when you wake up, you're in God's will because you've been living right. And you are doing what's right. And then the day after that, and the year after that, and the year after that, you wake up and you are in God's will because you have been living right. And then when the big time comes to make a decision where you're going to go to Bible college or trade school or the military, when the big time comes where for you to make a decision on whether or not you're going to, pop the question to this girl or to this, well, I guess you wouldn't, propose to a guy, but whatever the case is, when it comes time to make this big decision, you're not going to be so far away from God that you have no earthly idea what to say. You see, when we got engaged, it wasn't, I just don't know if I should. I don't know if I should. I mean, I'll say it was, the day we got engaged was our birthday, because we both share the same birthday. And I was questioning whether or not I should do it, but not because I didn't want to get engaged. I thought our plans were going to fall through. I was going to take her up in an air balloon that night, and we were going to get engaged up there in this air balloon. But I was afraid that because of winds or storms, that they were going to cancel it and we weren't going to get to do it. And I was going to miss out on all sorts of other good opportunities throughout the day in pretty places where I could have engaged. And instead, now I'm doing it at a gas station along the interstate, So I'm like, well, should I just do it now? Now we're at the fireworks time. Should I go ahead and do it now? Or I just don't know if they're going to be open or not. I won't know until I get there, because the winds could stop or they could start. And I just struggled with that all day long. So I wasn't doubting whether or not I should marry her. I was just doubting what to make the question. The ring was in my pocket all day long. And this is a good place. Is this a good time? And she was thinking in her mind, you said we were doing something special tonight and we're going. You're not getting out of this. She didn't know what I was going to do. She hoped that's what I was going to do. But before I gave her the ring, we had already known, we're going to get married. We just haven't settled all the details yet. We even had a good idea of when we were going to get married, even though we weren't engaged yet. And how did we arrive at that conclusion? Well, as I've said before, there was the desire. The desire alone is not good enough to make it God's will for someone to get married. But there was a desire there, and there ought to be. There was also, how do I say this? No good reason for us not to. And again, that alone is not a good enough reason. But there were no doctrinal differences that would hinder. She is a Christian. She was then too, just in case you're wondering. She was a Christian. And on top of that even by itself isn't just enough. I needed somebody that was more than just a Christian. She had to line up in lots of other areas with dress standards and music standards and all sorts of other standards. We needed to be compatible and line up in those areas so that one of us or both of us weren't compromising. So we had to line up concerning our faith and concerning our standards, concerning what we planned on doing with children one day. Are you willing to set aside your career that you spent all this time and money in college for to stay home and raise children, which is a vastly more important job than shuffling paperwork somewhere? A vastly more important job than cleaning this or washing that or any other job that exists out there. Raising good, godly children is one of the most important jobs on this planet, despite the fact that the world today puts down the stay-at-home mom as if she does nothing but eat bonbons and watch soap operas all day, which I don't even know if they make bonbons or soap operas anymore. I'm not at home during the day, so I guess I wouldn't know. And they've belittled this idea of being the stay-at-home mom, whereas tell you what, they say that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, because they're tomorrow's leaders. And we'll get to that thought here in just a little bit as well. But we had agreed and talked about all of those things. We had talked about even contraceptives and other things, long before the engagement period came along, because, hey, let's get down to business here. I'm almost 30 years old. I want to get married. I'm, immature in one sense that I'm not in the dating 18-year-old mindset of just playing around. There's no time to mess around anymore, I need to get down to business here. And so we talked about the important things. And so by the time engagement came along, it wasn't a question as to whether or not we were going to get married or we should get married. It was just a matter of time. Taking care of children also takes time. And it takes a whole lot of planning and a whole lot of effort. And teaching them to know God's will, that can be a tricky one. It can be tough to teach them to know God's will. And the easiest thing that we can say is, you need to be in God's will today. And then when that day arrives, where you have a big decision to make, It's not going to be a big question mark by that point. You're already going to have had direction by that point and guidance from the Holy Spirit by that point. Proverbs 4:1 says this, "Hear ye children the instruction of a father, and attend to no understanding, for I give you good doctrine. Forsake not my law." I don't know what gets in the hearts of kids to argue with mom and dad. As if we hadn't actually been there and done that 100 times. As if we hadn't actually made that mistake. As if we hadn't already taken the class and gotten the medal or the boo-boo, whatever the case is, for whatever class we failed. As if we hadn't already. Sometimes it boggles my mind. Why are you arguing with me? You're 5 years old. What do you know about this? Why are you arguing with me? I know better. Do you trust that daddy knows better? Do you trust that daddy knows more than you know about something? Now, there might be things they know that I don't, like what the neighbor girl said or did, but, that's beside the point. You don't need to argue with mom and dad. You don't need to argue with mom and dad's rules or argue with mom and dad's discipline or instruction, just like this verse says, that we have no business arguing with God's instruction. He says, I give you good doctrine. Part of that good doctrine is this is what a family is, and this is what a marriage is. And if you want to have healthy children and spiritually healthy children, then this is how you operate. You stay together, father and mother, and you take them to church, and you read the Bible to them, and you pray with them. This is how you have a godly family. One study pointed out that the average parent spends, listen to this, just 7 minutes per day actively with their child. That doesn't mean on the same couch watching TV, or in the kitchen while one is cooking and the other is playing, but 7 minutes per day with their children. That might sound ludicrous, but I can, as a father, I can easily see how that could be done. And my kids don't even spend all day in school, but I could easily see how we could be busy doing all the things that need to be done, and then there's all of the things that I want to do, and then there's only so much time left after that. When I was a teacher and a principal, there were some kids that they got dropped off at 7 o'clock in the morning for school, an hour early, and they stayed till 6 o'clock at night, the same kids. And here they were 11 hours a day with somebody else, learning somebody else's habits, somebody else's vocabulary, somebody else's idioms, somebody else's spirituality, which may be a good thing and may not be a good thing. Learning somebody else's fundamentals, somebody else's doctrine. And that was a scary thought to me, because if you leave at 6, and most of these kids went to bed at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock, you had dinner, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of homework time, and that was it. And off to bed they went. And who was raising their children? We were given as parents the responsibility to raise our children. Now, some can send their kids to school and still be responsible and know what they're being taught and know what their teachers are doing and saying, and I understand that. But it's very easy for us to get into this mindset of, I'm pushing them off on the school teacher, it's a Christian school maybe, and I'll let them handle the education and the Bible classes, and I'll let the youth pastor handle their spiritual education and their salvation, and I'll let the preacher handle their baptism and all these other things, and I'm just going to hand them off to all these other people and just let them all handle it, and I'd not even be aware of what's going on in their lives, what their friends' names are, if there's a bully in the school, and what's going on and what's being said. And what's worse is not being aware of what's going on in their own personal lives. What's going on their phones? What kind of music are they listening to? What kind of YouTube channels are they subscribed to? What kind of social media experience are they having? Who are their friends? Who are they watching and listening to a lot? Who is reaching out to them via their social media that I, as a parent, can't find out about because they're using the kind of apps that hide and scramble that kind of stuff? And too many parents are just trusting that somebody out there is keeping an eye on their kids, that somebody out there is paying attention, even if it's not them. Some of the greatest seeds that you are ever going to sow are going to be in the hearts and minds of young children. We all can come into contact with little kids at some point in time, whether it be, again, our own kids or grandkids or Sunday school or in a variety of ways, there are some very precious seeds that you plant there. It amazes me sometimes what my kids are listening to that I'm doing and saying, or what they're watching that I'm doing, and I would even think twice about it. And then there are all these other things that I wish they were paying attention to, and they didn't hear a word of it, right? But it's amazing to me the things that they'll remember. And that'll be months later, and Colton will bring up something I said in a sermon. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, I might have said that. I don't know. He's like, oh, yeah, you did. I was like, well, I'm glad you were listening to that much of it at least. You never know, though, what seeds you are planting or when you are planting those seeds. But we have to be aware of the other influences in their lives, other influences that are pulling them away constantly. And we can take that and we can apply many of these same principles to ourselves, by the way. We can apply that same principle of what things might be pulling our attention away from the Lord, from our Heavenly Father. Pulling them away from His diligent care, or pulling their children away from our diligent care. Children need direction. They need somebody to give them structure to point them in the right direction, because an arrow left unpointed is going to end up causing some damage. I remember it was one summer evening, we were sitting around the fire, and Sissy had this little toy bow and arrow, and she was trying desperately to figure out how to use the thing. And she was really struggling. She had it backwards, and then she had it pointed towards herself, and then it was a good 3 or 4 minutes. I was sitting there videoing her, trying to sort out this bow and arrow thing so that she could fire it, and eventually it kind of goes off and it shoots up straight in the air. And I think she could shoot herself in the eye with her own arrow this way, because she couldn't figure out how to use it. It was humorous to watch, but an undirected arrow is a pretty dangerous thing. Like any projectile, like a bullet. We have to be very careful. We answer for whatever that bullet hits. If you are using a firearm, you have to answer for anything that bullet strikes or hits. The same thing with our children. They need direction. They need to be pointed in the right direction. They need to be told why. It needs to be explained to them. Maybe they might even need to see the consequences of not going in the right direction. But if you neglect to provide that direction, you can be sure that somebody else is going to. Your children are not going to go through life without any influences. There is no vacuum when it comes to influences with kids. If we are not the influence, somebody or something else will be. And I can tell you, Disney's lining up. They desperately want to be that influence. They're not trying to be a help to the family. I can tell you, Nickelodeon and all of these others, they're not trying to be an aid or a help to the family. They're all lining up, queuing up, as they say in Britain, to be that influence. There are a lot of people on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram who consider themselves to be influencers. They have, hundreds of thousands or even millions of people that follow them. And so if they say, wear this lipstick, everybody's like, oh, that's the greatest. And they get that lipstick and they all wear it. And of course, this person makes all sorts of money off of that sort of thing. And they are influencing other people. We are never without influence. And our children will never be without influence. The question is, what will that influence be? Who is doing it? And what direction are they being influenced in? The direction that others provide, however, is probably going to be very tragic for your child. So our job is to set the direction. We need to accept this responsibility. We have to recognize the responsibility. Kids, they don't just pop out by accident. And they don't raise themselves. And they don't just miraculously grow up to be good people that do what's right. That happens by design. And we have to recognize the responsibility that has been given to us. So the first thing that we looked at this evening is that direction is needed. And we look at verse number 5 again, and we see that leadership is provided. Look again at Psalm 127, verse 5, where he says this, "Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." In the Middle East, and especially in ancient times, the gate of the city was a place where the leaders were. The gate of the city wasn't just a doorway or an entrance into the city. Also included in that gate, there were going to be a complex of structures for meeting rooms where the important city leaders would go to the gate and they would gather there. That's where the town hall council would meet. But also, this is where the judges would perform their business there at the gate. If you needed an audience with the governor or an audience with the king, this would also be there at the gate. This is where you stood guard over the city, but this is also where armies met. If you wanted to meet an attacking army and didn't want to have to hide in behind your walls, you would, as they say, sally forth from the gate. And your army would march out from that front gate, and then you would line up there in front of your walls if you thought your army stood a chance anyways, to battle and defeat the attackers from outside the wall. The gate of the city was a very important place to the controlling of the city in a whole variety of ways. To controlling them legally through law, to controlling them by judgment, to controlling them also through martial law and military means. The gate of the city was very important. And so this is where the important people of the city would gather, whether you were a judge, a magistrate, a city leader, or a military leader. This is where they would be, in the gate of the city. In fact, it was to be in the gates became a figure of speech for political leadership or military defense. So what verse 5 is saying here is that wisely directed children are going to speak with the enemies in the gates, referring here to their leadership or their protective abilities. Thinking about this, that your little kids today that need you to come and clean up their messes are going to be tomorrow's generals and tomorrow's city council members, tomorrow's CEOs, tomorrow's pastors, tomorrow's missionaries. They're going to be tomorrow's leaders in a whole host of ways. So I have a responsibility to take the time to train a very well-balanced and directed arrow that one day I can launch out to hit its target. We desperately need future leaders in our nation, future godly leaders in our nation and in our country. And one interesting thought is our society has put so little emphasis on childbearing, to have any children as a sacrifice. One, that's hard. Two, man, you're a glutton for punishment. Certainly, society says you should never have more than 2 kids. But a society cannot survive unless every family is having, I think that it's 2.2. I don't know how you have 0.2 of a kid, but that's what they say the statistics should be, that a society cannot survive unless each household is having 2.2 children to be able to replace mom and dad and then some. Otherwise, the society is going to continue to decline, as our whole world is doing. China is on the decline because they have been depopulating. They have been killing their own children to try to prevent from being overpopulated. And we have been doing the same thing in the United States for different reasons, to protect our careers, to protect our 401ks, to protect our physical comfort or our educational abilities, or simply because we just didn't feel like going through the pain and struggle of birth. And so we committed genocide on entire generations of children. We're raising next year's leaders. And one of the great things about this is Christians, we're the ones having the big families. So you would think then, if we're the ones producing all the kids, eventually we would take over, right? We're not the only ones producing all the kids. But hey, that's a good thing. Having lots of kids so that we can have lots of arrows there in the quiver and launch them forth, train them up right, so that then they can go and stand in the gates. But we have to prevent the wolves from getting them along the way and from turning their hearts and minds along the way. God created us to desire the sense of connection and belonging that comes through a family. We don't desire to be alone. We desire, it says in Psalm 68, verse 6, that God setteth the solitary in families. But our culture increasingly denies what a family is, let alone the impact of family. God's desire is for the family that He created and that He designed. But it needs to be rooted. It's not just enough to get married and have kids. We need to be rooting our families. We need to have our marriages rooted. Rooted where? Well, rooted in the place where we grew up. Rooted in our political leanings. Rooted in what? Well, you know the answer to that question. Rooted in God. In His characteristics, rooted in God, in His mercy and grace. Rooted in Jesus Christ and who He is, what He did, where He is now. Rooted in the Word of God as a daily part of our lives. Making sure that our family is rooted so that when the storms come, and they always do, don't think that you're going to have a marriage without storms. Don't think that you're going to have a family without storms. But so that when the storms do come, the roots are in something far stronger than the sands of this world. They're in the rock that is God. Maybe the family has already been uprooted and fragmented. Maybe you were raised in a broken or a dysfunctional family. Maybe you see what the Bible has to say about raising children, and maybe there's regret in your heart for missed opportunities that you had. Maybe you've had an abortion. You grieve that decision and wish you could change what you had done. The fact is that none of us are perfect people. None of us are perfect parents. And I tell my kids that every now and then too. We're not perfect parents. You're going to find faults in mommy and daddy. And so can every other child out there find faults in mom and dad. But we all need God's grace. Which, hey, praise the Lord, God offers His grace freely to all who humbly come before Him. It says in James 4:6, but He giveth more grace. That's like when you get your pumpkin pie slice on your plate and your fork, and then you walk over to the person with the whipped cream, if my wife's not around anyways. And I come up to them, I say, yeah, can I have some whipped cream on my pie? And so maybe it's the spray kind, and like, shh. And I look around to see if my wife is watching. No, she's not around. And so they give me a little bit more whipped cream. And you know what? That can never runs out. And I look around again and I say, well, man, she must really be good and gone. So here, I don't want to see the pumpkin pie. You just cover the whole thing up, right? I don't want to see it. He giveth more grace. It doesn't just say He giveth grace. He giveth grace. Yeah, put a little dab of it on there. No, He giveth more grace. And boy, it just keeps coming out. The more we need it, which we need more of it all the time, but the more we desire it, the more it just keeps right on coming out. And it's not fattening either, unlike whipped cream. He giveth more grace. Wherefore He saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Two very different reactions there. God resisteth the proud. The proud come to God and say, God, I'm so good. God, I'm so religious. You owe me, eternity. And aren't you so happy you have me? And God puts His hands out and He says, stop where you are. I'm not listening to what you have to say. Turn around and go back where you came from. He resisteth the proud, pushes them away. I mean, that's harsh. But on the other hand, we have grace, which is a whole lot softer than the resistance. He says, no, you just come right on. No, but God, you don't understand. I'm not worth anything. No, you just come on. But God, you don't understand my thoughts or my words. No, you just keep right on. But God, I keep falling. No. But God, I struggle in my prayer life. No, you just keep right on coming. Do you desire my grace? Well, yes, but I don't deserve it. Yeah, but do you desire it? You just keep right on coming. And I'm just going to keep giving you more and more and more grace. He giveth more grace. Wherefore He saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. As parents, we need grace. We need grace because of the poor decisions we make, and the mistakes that we make. We need grace from God and from our children to forgive us for mistakes we've made and things we've said and done we shouldn't have. We need grace. They need it too. And one of the ways that your children learn about God's graciousness is from mom and dad's graciousness. This is how we can best model what grace is to our limited ability, to the limited extent that we can model grace. I don't know where you are. I mean, I know mostly, somewhat of where we are family-wise, but you need to determine that at this point, you are going to seek God's grace to strengthen future generations of your family. Maybe you're into the great-grandchildren phase. Maybe you're even into the great-great-grandchildren phase. But whatever the situation is, can you make that determination that you are going to strengthen spiritually future generations of your family? That you are going to put your dead level best into those kids and grandkids, great-grandkids, nieces, nephews, the children that God has put into your sphere of influence. Maybe it's even just my kids. But if God has given you the opportunity to be an influence on their hearts and on their lives, you have a responsibility to do it. And so, families need direction, but leadership is provided. God giveth His grace to us. So, Psalm 127, we looked here at laboring in vain. You can read all the parenting handbooks and watch all the parenting YouTube videos, which is more common now than reading the books, I guess. But you can talk to all of the child psychologists and therapists, and you can get opinions from everybody under the sun on how to discipline a child and how to potty train a child and how to get a child to eat his vegetables and how to do this and how to do that. But, well, like it said there in verse number 1 of Psalm 127, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. We cannot make our children spiritual, but we can train them in the right direction. And we can model a right spirit before them. We can model godliness before them. And we can train them in that direction, but we cannot make them. If God's not involved in it, if we have excluded Him, our best efforts will never be enough. So whether there's regret or worry, understand this, there's the grace of God. And we've all seen, kids that didn't grow up in good homes grow up and serve the Lord with the rest of their life. I saw many examples of that as I was growing up and down in Florida, kids whose parents had no desire whatsoever in spiritual things, but they decided they wanted to go into the ministry. They came to church faithfully. And I tell you, it wasn't trained up in their home, but it was still the graciousness of God on their behalf. But there is something we can do. So let's make sure that we are being directed ourselves as individuals in our spiritual lives, so that then we can in turn direct those adults and or children that we have an influence over, so that we can direct them. And maybe we could even look at this as a church family, in a sense, in the same way that we can direct one another, help to correct or train even one another in the ways that we ought to go. And some of that training is done from the pulpit, and much of that training is done through interpersonal relationships, talking to one another and getting to know one another, and then being confident enough to say, maybe you should do this or change this to help you in your spiritual walk. And that's one of the great joys and blessings of being a member of the body of the church, is having all those people around you to, yes, pray for you and to talk to you, but also to help you spiritually to walk straighter, to get back up and dust yourself off and to heal the wounds and to continue on stronger than you were before. So no matter which kind of family, I guess, you're looking at here, let us make sure that we include the Lord. We could decide to build the church, and we could go about it all sorts of ways. We could have all sorts of exciting music and programs, and we could build the church from a advertising and worldly perspective. How do you get a crowd of people? Well, I can tell you what, Hollywood knows. I could go to any club and that's popular in the area, and they can tell me how you get crowds of people to come. But what good would it do me to build that if I've excluded the Lord? And you could train up your children with great education, the nicest clothes, the finest shoes. You could train them in instruments and music and martial arts. You could train them in all sorts of things. They could be an exceptional football player or a baseball player and still grow up to be shipwrecked in their lives. If you don't include the Lord, you're building the house in vain.